It's my pleasure now to introduce the first speaker on keeping up with the internet. The central issue for our first speaker, Lee Rainie of Pew Research, is this topic. His formal title is Director of Internet Research for Pew. They have issued over 650 meticulously researched reports on the internet, its users, and trends in its evolution. So start your reading there if you're interested in the future of the internet. He is trained as a journalist and was formerly the editor of U.S. News and World Report. His undergraduate degree is from Harvard, and his master's is in political sciences from Long Island University. Please join me in welcoming Lee Rainie with his thoughts on the future of the internet.
Thanks so much, Pat. It's an honor to be here. And the last part of my talk is going to be about the history and need for social innovation. One of the ways that people master technology is to try to cope with it and try to tame it. And you're sitting in a space of social innovation thanks to Jeff Holmes. You know, this kind of event wasn't taking place anywhere in America not too long ago. People meeting, talking about stuff, that's a very common thing. But doing it with the patronage of a successful entrepreneur, and doing it under the auspices of a university, and doing it with a come one, come all crowd, that's pretty new. And it's a testament to a nice vision, and it's a great example of how maybe some of the worst stuff that might be happening as we think about the future can be mitigated by smart people doing smart things in smart places in smart ways. We self-describe at the Pew Research Center that we are a fact tank. We don't say we're a think tank because think tanks are people and organizations that promote ideas. They are advocates for solutions to political and social problems. That's not the line of work we're in. We do a lot of primary research about how technology is affecting people now and where it might go in the future, but we don't do it, I would be fired actually, it's a firing offense at Pew, with an agenda driving our work. We're not here to be advocates for any kind of future for the internet. We don't promote policies. We're not cheerleaders for digital technologies. We hope we do generate information that's useful for people as they're planning it in their own lives, and we hope we do it in a dispassionate enough way that they will find it useful for their work. But I'm not here to sell you something. I'm here to talk about a lot of work that we've done that looks a little bit over the horizon about the future of the internet. Since 2004, we've been conducting these large canvassings of experts of the internet. We identified them through their smart predictions about the early days of the internet, probably when Jeff was helping invent it. And then we saw that they were so smart in the early 90s about what was going to be happening in the early 2000s that we began this regular series of canvassings to ask people about what was going to be happening in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. So since 2005, the first canvassing was 2004, first report is 2005, we've issued a long-running series of reports. We're going to issue our 9th version next week about the impact of the internet on well-being in the future. But we have a pretty good track record of seeing what's over the horizon and beginning to think about some of the changes that are occurring. The very first survey we did, our headline finding was cyber attacks were on their way. These experts who both study technology as well as are builders of systems and original creators and pioneers of the internet, they saw that the internet was going to embed itself so deeply in utilities and business life and things like that, it would just be too ripe a target, and it had so many vulnerabilities that it would be victimized by people who wanted to do harm. Cyber attacks now are a top-of-mind thing. There are going to be important discussions here today about it because it's a central preoccupation of our government and the people who run our economy. They predicted the shift to mobile. That's already underway. They talked about increasing concerns about privacy. You don't have to look any earlier than the beginning part of this week to see how people's concerns about privacy are now a top-of-mind element of our culture. It talked about the growth of fringe groups. They didn't call it tribalism at the time, and they didn't call it terror groups, but that was embedded in many of the answers they got there. We talked about hyperconnectivity with people, and one of the wonderful insights that we got from the predictions that people made was that some people were predicting that personal social networks would eventually become almost an evolutionary, rewarded, or harmed aspect of human life. The people who are good at building their networks and exploiting their networks and understanding them with new technologies, we're going to be in great shape in the future. And the people who didn't do it well, and particularly the people who are not tech savvy enough to sort of be in command of their networks, they were going to suffer. And in many ways, the Darwinian selection would probably minimize their degree of suffering over the long term. But there was an interesting way in which now the things that we are living under are eventually going to affect how we evolve as a species. They talked about the rise of virtual and augmented reality. There's some fabulous presentations on that later in the program here. They talked about new boundaries in social and work life. As a matter of fact, no boundaries in some sense. And we now live in a world where you can do home things at work and work things at home and leisure things while you're in the midst of doing busy things and doing busy things while you're in the midst of leisure. So there are lots of ways that we are renegotiating social contracts, social relationships, and social norms because of that. We talked about the decline of TV. We're living that in many direct ways now. Talked about the rise of cyber currencies. And every once in a while, we'd ask a question that was sort of a profound metaphysical question about what is all this connectivity going to do to such things as tolerance and wisdom? Would it make it smarter? Would it make us more tolerant of each other? Each time we've done that, we've probably done 4 or 5 versions over the years on subjects like this, we get an absolutely split verdict. Half the respondents say, yup, it can't be anything but better when more information is available to people in their lives, more connectivity, more contact with people. We're going to improve as a species. We have to have more understanding of each other, and we have to be smarter with each other. The other half of people say, absolutely not. Human beings are a fixed quantity. We evolved on the savannas of Africa. We're deeply tribal. We're deeply manipulable. Human nature is never going to change. All this is going to give us is a new set of tools to make each other miserable. And so I've got a little bit more data on that in our recent surveys, but it's interesting that there's just no consensus on the direction we're heading to in the future. And because I'm invited to places like this, one of the years I sort of did a cheap trick was I asked all of these thousands of technologists that we talked to, I said, do you guys know, do you smart people who are inventing the future, do you know which gadgets are coming around the next corner we turn? Or is stuff going to surprise you, right? And the verdict we got on this, again, the statistics on this aren't awesome because it's a convenience sample. It's not a public opinion sample. But we're talking a couple thousand very different, diverse scientists. 16% said, we can see the future. 81% said, we don't even know what's coming along. And we did this in 2011, I think, or 2010. And the iconic thing that they pointed out was, if you had asked us this question in the year 2000, none of us would have predicted the iPhone. You know, the technology for the iPhone existed since the mid-90s. Microsoft had a version, Apple had a version, and stuff like that. So something didn't happen in that critical moment that convinced people there's no market for this, there's no social need for this, there's just not a consumer base for it. And the iPhone, of course, has upended all of our lives. 77% of American adults have smartphones now. It's the fastest deploying consumer electronic technology in the history of the world. The slope of the curve of the adoption is greater than for television, for cable, for radio, for the internet itself, for personal computers. It's an amazing story. So they said, basically, we don't even know the future. So don't feel bad if you walk out of this stuff. There are a lot of smart folks here who do see around corners and probably can convince you at least of some of the things that are around the corner. But a lot of us don't really know exactly how it's going to shape up. And a lot of us don't exactly know even what the gadgetry is underlying it. So in a series of things that we've done since that time, we've asked about the year 2025 or the year 2030. And we've asked about how the internet in particular, but the cluster of digital technologies are going to roll out. And the sort of meta conclusion that we reached in a survey like this is that by the year 2025, again, these are these experts' views, the internet will become like electricity. Less visible, yet more deeply embedded in people's lives for good and for ill. One of the classic definitions of when technology has real power is when it fades into the background. That's when people have so deeply embraced it that they don't even know they're using it. When you walked into this room today, you didn't sit down in your seat and say, thank God I'm on electricity, right? The only thing that you would have thought is if the lights weren't on and the microphone didn't work, is what's wrong? Well, the internet's going to get to that point relatively soon in our lives with both good and not so good consequences. So the sort of mega trends that these experts saw, they talked about a global immersive ambient network of computing environment built through all this stuff, all the connected devices and sensors and other smart gadgets that would be deployed around the world. It would just literally, the world would be surrounded by a digital skin that could be manipulated and used by all sorts of devices to provide all sorts of insights. That skin would serve up data to people that would allow them to know a lot more about what was going on in the world, both sort of directly in their personal experience of the environment, but also through augmented reality, the use of algorithms that could predict sort of what was relevant to them in the place where they were, and that the sort of gadgetry around them. They were beginning to talk about self-driving cars and drones and the way that they would be feeding information and amplifying our capacities. Then they talked about the ways in which, particularly in a gigabit environment, a whole new cluster of applications would emerge, starting with our own agents, our own holograms, and literally our own presence with other people being renegotiated because you actually didn't, in this environment, have to be physically near someone to be engaged with them. But your hologram could be interacting with their hologram, or your agent could be interacting with their agent, and it would feel good enough that it would feel almost like the real encounter itself. And that would change business relationships and the way people procured products and services. It would certainly change a lot of community activities. It might change the airline industry and things like that. And of course, they all talked about the way that virtual reality would be creating incredibly powerful immersive experiences for folks, that they could literally be living in a better version of the world they're already in, or living in a realistic seeming version of a world that doesn't exist in real life here. They also talked about the way that our sort of cognitive functions, literally our attention and the way we allocate our time, would be affected by this proliferation of media. In addition to the world having a skin of connected relationships, we ourselves have data all around us. It's really like a second skin. You know, you can summon it up at any time you want. You can access it whenever you want. And there are ways now that this ubiquitous media and information environment is going to change the way that people allocate their attention and particularly their focus on media. I say there are 5 of them. These experts had fewer numbers, but I'm going to add my own interpretation on this. One new zone I call signals. It's literally the way you set up alerts on your phone, right? About 25% of Americans say now that they are constantly online. And that literally doesn't mean that they're looking at their screens every minute of every day, but it does mean that they have set up alerts and signals from their screens to sort of say, let me know when this thing that's happened in the world that I care about, and I will then access that signal because you've told me. News has changed, the stock market's changed, my sports team has lost, my best buddy is posted on my Facebook site or something like that. So we're now in an environment where we have set up these automatic alarms when things matter to us. Snacking environment is an environment where now what you guys did before we all started talking, right? You were looking at your phones. So you had a little bit of time to kill. Maybe you were talking to your neighbors, but basically you're dosing yourself with media and things that just fill in the gaps of your life, maybe when you're waiting for the light to change or when you're waiting in line at the grocery store or something like that. So you're snacking now on media. It's invaded your life in a new way. Social streams are the things that we're doing lots with social media, but it could be any kind of web app or things like that. It literally means that there are times a day when you dip your ladle in the stream just to see what's happening, maybe during your lunch hour, maybe after dinner or something like that. You're checking in on what's going on, and you're not reading comprehensively what's going on in the news or what's going on in all of your social media feeds, but you're seeing what's happening at that moment in front of you. And again, it's a sort of a different approach to people's access to media than has ever existed before. Of course, we live in a split-screen environment now. People often have multiple screens on when they are accessing media. One is a primary screen, but the other is the chatter screen. right? So when there's a big sports event or when there's a big cultural event, like the Oscars or the Emmys or the last episode of Mad Men, you're watching the show, but you're also watching the commentary on the show because that's how you make meaning out of it, and that's how you can contribute your own ideas, usually your snarky ideas about what's going on. But that's a different kind of environment than the one where we're passive consumers of media. I talk about Spreeville or Village or binging because it's a wholly new idea that you're in charge of the play button of your life and you can watch 10, 12, 16 hours continuously of TV, or you can keep on and off pausing. It's changing the narrative arc of our storytelling capacity, these sort of Game of Thrones life kind of thing, where you have these sort of prolonged narratives or multiple narratives and things like that. Movies didn't quite deliver that experience. Even TV series didn't quite deliver that experience, although the late Stephen Bochco introduced us to that idea. But it's a completely different way of accessing media, and it's sort of crowded out a lot of traditional broadcast television and other media things, and so that's important. And I put Tom Cruise up there in this scene from the Minority Report because I think we're soon enough going to enter a space I call Synthesize Spaces, where our algorithms are the corporate understanding of who we are, our app's understanding of who we are, is going to feed us material no matter where we are, using available wall space or other kinds of screen space, using our phone if we've used it. But we'll be able to manipulate data ambiently and haptically rather than having to type or swipe or things like that. A lot of it will come from voice activation, which is sort of the way that we orchestrate now the Internet of Things in our lives. We'll be talking to the air, but all of a sudden the air will be delivering back to us the data and insights and media that we want. So there are some good things that'll come from this, at least according to these experts. The first thing is that we will just life will be more seamless. We'll be able to share information with each other. We'll be able to extract data from the environment. We'll be able to access things in a much easier, more convenient way. It'll make the world smarter, safer, and more efficient. So a lot of the earliest enthusiasms about the Internet of Things is it's just going to make supply chain problems and accessing to consumers way easier and way more efficient, which means the prices are probably going to reflect that. And their communication is a way that sort of digital devices like bots or like your agent or stuff like that are going to communicate with other aspects of this ecosystem so that you'll just essentially be an enhanced human being. You'll have other cognitive type activities conducted in your behalf without you necessarily being the cognition that's driving those interactions. It's going to advance productivity and enhance leisure. The second thing they talked about was the rise of artificial intelligence. Literally, we're entering a world in the not-distant future where the Internet's everywhere and artificial intelligence is riding atop it. So the artificial intelligence world is everywhere. We're going to use all these sort of extra devices that are going to be able to access that material. It's going to be serving us in interesting ways. And the two domains where this might show up most dramatically and have the biggest impact are healthcare and education. Over the years, when we've talked to these experts about the Internet, they've been so frustrated that education and healthcare have been the lagging indicators in embracing this stuff, in using it efficiently, in making it work for people and patients and students and things like that. Well, now, as this world becomes infused with data and the tools that provide data and media to us, those two domains are eventually going to be affected in very, very dramatic ways, too, for the better. And they talked about the environment itself becoming censored. The Internet of Things, of course, relates to all of the ways in which bodies, homes, communities, environment, and industry are going to be sending signals to us. One of the benefits that you get you get lots of benefits out of that, not least of which is you learn more about yourself, and the environment itself begins to get smart. So if a building that has smart sensors in it begins to sense that there are cracks in the core girders, that's going to be read out to the engineers who will be able to fix it before there are serious structural problems in the building. There are ways in which the environment now tells us incredibly rich stories about what's going on, and we'll be able to understand global systems in dramatic new ways and make improvements and think about interventions that will make things better. Great. okay? Smarter, faster, safer, more knowledgeable about ourselves and the environment. What could go wrong? Well, there's actually a longer list of the things that these folks worry about. It starts with privacy, right? It's every time we talk about anything related to the future of the internet, there's a predictable cohort of these experts that talk about it, and why not? It's increasingly challenged. This week provides dramatic new evidence of it. I think what's been so striking about the Zuckerberg Cambridge Analytica story is that since the Snowden revelations of mid-2013 and all of the cybersecurity breaches since then, including most powerfully the Equifax data breach, but also data breaches of government officials and things like that, we pick up public concern about these things in our surveys, and yet we pick up no behavioral change. You know, they still get the stuff, they still use the stuff, they still say they like the stuff. We're going to put out survey findings in a couple of weeks that basically say the vast, vast, vast overwhelming majority of Americans say the internet works for them and they love it, despite all of this stuff. They're a little worried now in ways they didn't used to be, though, about the overall impact on society. And they are increasingly concerned, and will be so in the future, about what happens to my data after it is captured. They're mystified by how it's shared and passed along. They're worried about the profiling that's going to be done of them based on the combination of data sets that will be used. Everybody might have heard that in China now, they're going to reward people with social credit scores. If you've got a high score that you're a good citizen and a good neighbor and a good worker and a good street crosser, you get a high score, and you might get benefits at the marketplace, you might get benefits in social dealings and stuff like that. I mentioned crossing the street because literally there was a system rolled out in Shanghai last week. Using face recognition, they are watching people jaywalk across streets. And if they jaywalk and they're spotted doing it, they get a text message saying, this is your first warning, don't do it again or you're going to get fined. Right? So that's the social scoring system. Americans don't quite understand it evolving that quickly here, but they're really worried and they don't know how to fix it. And one of the striking things these experts said was that privacy is eventually going to become something that the rich might be able to afford and lots of other people can't. In effect, we're already living our lives public by default and private by effort. It will get even more pronouncedly public in the future as these systems roll out. The nature of work will change, so our interactions with machines are evolving. The rise of robotics, the rise of artificial intelligence and other things is that we're renegotiating literally what skills are performed in the marketplace, and there are ways that routinized jobs, sometimes dirty jobs, sometimes dangerous jobs, are being outsourced to the machine. And okay, that might be good, but eventually you run out of skills that only humans can uniquely perform, at least according to some of these folks, and you get a different kind of social disruption where you have lots of unemployed or underemployed folks who are not happy about that situation. So a sort of renegotiation of the social contract is in the offing. In our future, we're going to have a much more urgent debate in the coming years, according to these folks, on guaranteed basic income. And there are going to be interesting ways that human beings are going to get wiped out. Their dignity, their agency, their self-worth is deeply implicated in these kinds of developments. And we don't yet have the tools for addressing that. That's what freaks them out. Just a little side note, we've asked in two different ways interesting things about the future of work. A couple of years ago, even before this debate really got rolling about the future of work, we asked these experts, what do you think is going to happen? More jobs created than destroyed, or more jobs destroyed than created? We got one of those 50-50 verdicts. Half said more created than destroyed, half said more destroyed than created. And it was a fabulous, interesting precursor debate to the thing that's rising in urgency now. So the follow-up question we actually asked last year is, how are job training and education systems going to respond to this? And there's much more hope that, including folks who run universities, are going to adjust to this new reality, offer different kinds of courses, offer different kinds of credentialing processes, offer different kinds of avenues to teach things that humans are really good at and machines probably won't be good at in the foreseeable future. The awful term for this is soft skills. That's not what it really is, but it's critical thinking skills, it's terrific communication skills, it's being able to work with diverse folks and recognize patterns and be critical thinkers about that. So all that stuff is going to get emphasized in the future because that's how sort of we're going to distinguish ourselves from our computer overlords. They worry about digital divides a lot. There are new ways in which sort of classic socioeconomic problems get amplified in this environment. People who aren't tech savvy, people who aren't particularly shrewd about information, people who don't really work well in communities, people who don't have awesome social networks, they're going to get hammered in this new environment because the pace of change, just what you say here, right? Keeping up with the speed of innovation. Those folks probably are not going to be in good shape, whereas the people who do that are going to be even more likely pulled to a higher rungs on the ladder than they currently are. So divisions are actually going to amplify, according to some of these experts. They worried about the human toll of this stuff. One of the sort of lines that people use is abuses and abusers will evolve and scale. Again, sort of making each other miserable. These are just a new set of very powerful tools to make life difficult for other people. Bullying and tribal sort of rivalry and stuff like that is a major part of this, and we're just going to make each other even more miserable. Oh. And then the fifth thing they talk about is that humans have never been running in sync with technology change. It's just too much to expect. The technology comes into being, and humans either pull it down to their level or embrace other changes in life. And yet, the amount of change that is accelerating now, perfect underline for the headline of this conference, there's so much change taking place on so many fronts that we are simultaneously going to have to evolve our morals and ethics and social structures and relationship with each other, our relationship with our government, the polities relationship. So everything's up for grabs, and it's coming because it's not only this informatics stuff, but it's happening, with tons of brain research. We're now learning amazing new things, and that's only the beginning of story of how our brains work. There's stupendous changes coming in nanotechnology and biotechnology. So keep it, our systems now can barely keep up with one big problem at a time. As a matter of fact, arguably, they're not even doing so good at that. But when it's pressing on so many fronts now, there's a lot of concern that the runaway future of technology is going to outpace the human capacity to control it. So I work in Washington, and I live in Virginia, and maybe the best lesson to learn from history is one that Thomas Jefferson conveyed in a letter to a friend after his presidency was over. And it's on if you go to Washington, if you go to the Jefferson Memorial, this is on the fourth panel of that memorial is this thought from Thomas Jefferson that's so central to what we're talking about today. Laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made, new truths disclosed, and manners and opinions change with the change of circumstances, institutions must advance also and keep pace with the times. So that's a challenge for us. Days gone by, we figured stuff out. There have been disruptions and harms and difficulties that have come from it, but eventually humans prevail. So take a page from Jeff, socially innovate, figure out new ways that we're going to make this stuff work for us rather than have it break our backs. Thank you very much.